The alarm that woke the Stillwatch throne was not built to ring for ships, because in 9,000 years, no ship had ever moved fast enough to trip it. Watchkeeper Amun-Resh felt the floor change under his feet before he understood the sound. He had served on the high deck of the throne for 61 years, and in all that time, the deck had only ever hummed one note, a long, low tone that meant the sky was still. The lattice held everything. That was the first law a child of the Seraph Dominion learned before they learned their own name. The lattice held everything, and nothing in the bright, crowded heart of the galaxy moved, unless the Dominion let it move. Now the floor screamed. Amun crossed the high deck in 9 steps. He was a tall, narrow creature, gray as old bone, with 4 eyes set in a ring around his skull so that he could read every wall of the great chamber at once. 3 of those eyes were already wet with fear before the 4th caught up. The walls of the Stillwatch throne were not made of metal, they were made of frozen sky. They showed the whole near galaxy at once, 200,000 stars and every fixed thing that hung between them, and on every one of those walls the same red mark had appeared. A single contact, small, faint, and it was moving. "Report," Amun said, and was ashamed at how thin his own voice sounded. The reader on the low platform did not turn around. Her name was Sepha Mun, and she was the youngest reader ever to hold the morning watch, and her hands were shaking. "I have it on 3 rings," she said. "Speed 700. Holding. No. Climbing. 720. The number meant nothing and everything. The lattice measured speed against the fixed sky, against the held momentum of the whole settled galaxy, and the largest war barge the Dominion had ever floated could not cross 30 before the field took hold of it and slowed it to a crawl. A pebble flicked by a child reached 40 and stopped. The lattice did not allow more. The lattice was the reason the Seraph ruled 4,000 worlds without firing on a single one. You did not fight an empire that could freeze your fleet in the dark between stars and leave it there forever, drifting, slowing, until it never moved again. 720 was not a number that could exist. "Run it again," Amun said. "I have run it 9 times. Run it 10. Sepha Mun ran it 10. The walls flickered. The red mark moved. It had crossed the Veth Reach, a span that a Dominion courier took 40 days to cross at the field's mercy, and it had crossed it in the time the 2 of them had been speaking. Amun watched a stretch of fixed sky that he had stared at for 61 years, a stretch that had never changed, and he watched the small red thing tear straight through the middle of it, as though the lattice were not there at all. "Where is it going?" he said. Sepha Mun did not answer at once. She was leaning very close to her reading bowl, the way the young did when they hoped the numbers would change if they only looked harder. "It is not wandering," she said finally. "It is not a wreck pushed loose. It has a line. It is steering." "Steering where?" She lifted her head, and 3 of her 4 eyes found his, and the 4th stayed locked on the wall, as if she could not bear to lose the mark even for a breath. "Inward," she said. "Watchkeeper, it is steering inward. It is coming toward the center." Mun-Resh had stood on this deck through 2 pretender wars, and the long bad year, when the lattice fell sick over the hollow marches, and 40 worlds drifted free for a season before the Dominion took them back. He had never once been afraid of a thing he could see. Fear, in the Dominion, was for things that were not held, and the Dominion held everything. He went to the wall himself. He pressed 2 of his long gray hands flat against the frozen sky, against the place where the red mark was, and he tried to feel for it the way an old watchkeeper learns to feel, past the numbers, into the shape of the thing. It came back wrong. The lattice touched everything in the galaxy. It had a grip on every stone and every ship, and every drifting bone, a soft, constant pressure that the readers called the held weight. When Amun reached for the red mark, expecting that familiar grip, he found nothing. The lattice was pushing on the small, fast thing with everything it had, the full weight of 9,000 years of held sky, and the small, fast thing was simply not slowing down. "What does the archive say?" he asked. His voice had gone very quiet. "Pull the hull. Match it. Tell me whose it is." This was the part that was supposed to be easy. The Stillwatch archive held a record of every hull ever built in the settled galaxy, every keel laid by every people the Dominion had ever weighed and counted. 4,000 worlds and the dead names of 1,000 more. Nothing flew in the held sky that the archive did not already know, That was the whole point of holding the sky. You could not build a fleet in secret when every keel you laid sat still under the lattice's hand the moment it left the slip. Sepha Mun pulled the hull. The archive answered the way it always answered, fast and certain and complete. It said, "No match." She pulled it again, wider. Every dead registry, every lost people, every burned record from before the Dominion. The archive searched 4,000 worlds and 9,000 years. "No match. That is not possible," Ammon said. "Everything is in the archive. Everything that was ever built. Run the partial. Match the shape, match the metal, match anything." Sepha Mun ran the partial. The walls drew the small red thing larger, larger, until at last the lattice's eyes got close enough to draw its true shape, and the shape came up on every wall of the Stillwatch throne at once, and the deck went silent, and for the first time in 61 years, Ammon Resh did not know the name of a thing he could see. It was long. It was lean. It was dark. A flat dead gray that gave nothing back, and along its spine ran a single unbroken line of cold blue light. It carried no banners. It carried no registry mark. It was built like nothing the Dominion had ever weighed. All hard angles, and forward hunger, a knife thrown point first at the heart of the galaxy. And it was moving at 740 against a sky that did not allow 40. The archive offered one last line, the line it gave when it had nothing, the line no watchkeeper in living memory had ever read aloud. "Unknown hull. Origin unknown. Not in any record." "Sound the deep watch," Ammon said. "Wake the high table. Wake the lattice lords. Wake all of them." Sepha Mun turned at last, both hands still on her bowl. "Watchkeeper, the high table does not wake for one ship." Ammon Resh looked at the dark knife tearing through his fixed and frozen sky, the sky he had been told since birth that no one could move, and he felt the old certainty crack down its center like ice. "They will wake for this one," he said. The high table did wake, and it woke angry, which is how the powerful always wake when they are afraid and do not yet have a word for it. They gathered in the pale hall at the center of the Stillwatch throne, 11 lattice lords seated in a ring around a floor of frozen sky, each one older than most of the worlds they ruled. At the head sat First Lord Valancourt, who had held the center of the Dominion for 200 years, and had not once in that time seen a thing he could not name. He listened to Ammon Resh give his report, and when it was done, he made the small dismissive sound the seraph made instead of laughing. "A glitch in the field," Valancourt said. "A reader who cannot count. Show me the hull." They showed him the hull. The dark knife turned on every wall of the pale hall, slow and patient, and the small dismissive sound died in Valancourt's throat. "Speed," he said. 760, Ammon answered. "It has not slowed. The lattice has been gripping it for the full crossing. 9 hours now. It does not slow." A lattice lord named Osk-Thun leaned forward. She was the oldest of them, so old that her gray skin had gone nearly white, and she had built the lattice deepening that held the hollow marches still after the bad year. She of all of them understood what the field could do. 9 hours, she said softly. The full grip, for 9 hours, and it has not lost 1 unit of speed. That is what the readers say. Then the readers are wrong, or the lattice is sick again. Osk-Thun rose from her seat, which the oldest of them almost never did. "Bring it closer. Put a full anchor on it. Not the field, an anchor. Hold it the way we hold a war barge." This was no small thing. A full anchor was the heaviest grip the Dominion could lay, a focused weight of held sky drawn from the drives of 100 fixed stations, the same grip that had stopped a pretender fleet of 900 ships dead in the dark and left them there to rot. No people in 9,000 years had broken a full anchor. The field was the law. The anchor was the law made into a fist. They laid the anchor on the dark knife. Every wall of the pale hall showed the moment it landed. The held weight of 100 stations fell on the small fast ship at once, a pressure that could have crushed a moon's orbit flat. The readers in the deep rooms cried out the numbers. The whole Stillwatch throne shuddered as the drives in the fixed stations spun up to pour everything they had into the grip. The dark knife slowed. For one breath, the pale hall exhaled. Valancourt settled back into his seat. Osk-Thun watched with all 4 eyes, unblinking. 760 became 710. 710 became 680. The anchor was working. It was slow, slower than it should have been, but it was working, and across the ring of lattice lords something loosened that had been clenched tight since the alarm first rang. Then the line of cold blue light along the dark knife's spine grew brighter. It did not flare, it did not flash, it simply brightened, the way a thing brightens when it has decided to spend more of itself, and the number on the wall stopped falling. 680 held, and then it climbed. 690. 700, 720 against a full anchor drawn from 100 fixed stations, the heaviest grip the Dominion had ever closed on anything. More stations, Osthun said. Her voice did not shake. Her voice never shook. Pull from the marches, pull from the reach, pull every drive we have. They pulled every drive they had. 1,000 fixed stations across 4,000 worlds turned their full-held weight onto one dark ship the size of a single tower. The anchor doubled, tripled. It became a grip that had never been laid on anything in the history of the settled sky, a weight that should have stopped a wandering world. The blue line brightened again, the number climbed again. 740, 760. Faster now than before the anchor had ever touched it, as if the small, fast ship had simply waited to learn how hard the Dominion could push, and then pushed back twice as hard with room to spare. In the pale hall, no one spoke. It was Sepha Mun, on the deep channel, who broke the silence. The young reader's voice came thin and steady into the ring of frightened lords. "High table," she said. "It is not fighting the anchor. I have watched the whole crossing. It is not even straining. The grip is full, and it is moving through us like the field is fog." "Then what is it?" Valancourt said, and for the first time in 200 years, the First Lord of the Sereth Dominion asked a question instead of giving an answer. "What people builds a ship that does not feel the lattice? There is no such people. We weighed them all, we hold them all. There is no corner of the settled sky we have not counted." Osthun was very still. She was looking at the dark knife on the wall, at the line of cold blue light, at the hard forward angle of a hull built like a thrown blade, and something old and buried was moving behind her 4 pale eyes. "It did not come from the settled sky," she said. The ring turned to her. "There is no record of it, because it was never built here," she said. "No keel was laid under our hand, no slip we weighed ever held it. We hold everything in the settled sky, yes. We hold 4,000 worlds. We hold every stone between them." She lifted one long white finger toward the wall, toward the dark line tearing inward. "But the lattice ends. It has an edge. Past the edge there is the dark we never crossed. The dark we told ourselves was empty, because nothing ever came out of it. And something has come out of it. Something that learned to move where we cannot hold. The outer dark is empty," Valancourt said. "We sent 10,000 probes. Nothing answered. Nothing lives past the edge." "Nothing answered," Osthun said. "That is not the same as nothing lives." She lowered her hand. "We told a long story about the edge of the sky, First Lord. We told it for 9,000 years. And now a knife is coming out of the dark we never crossed, moving faster than our whole held sky can stop, steering straight for the center, and it is not in any record we keep, because we are not the ones who keep its record." The deep channel crackled. Sepha Mun again, and now her voice had changed, had gone from frightened to something stranger, something closer to awe. "High table. It is broadcasting." The ring snapped toward the deep channel. "Broadcasting what?" Valancourt said. "On what band? In what tongue?" "On every band," Sepha Mun said. "All of them at once. The same short signal, over and over, on every frequency the lattice can hear. It started the moment we laid the full anchor." "Decode it." "It will not decode. It is not in any tongue the archive knows. It is not Sereth. It is not any of the 4,000. It is not any dead language we ever recorded." A pause. The whole pale hall leaned toward the sound of her voice. "But it has a shape, High Table. The signal has a shape. It repeats. 3 parts, the same 3 parts, over and over, like a name said 3 ways, like the ship is telling us what it is called." Valancourt rose from his seat at the head of the high table. He was old and he was proud, and he had ruled the center of the galaxy for 200 years, on the certainty that nothing moved unless he allowed it. And now a thing he could not name was tearing through his sky and shouting its own name on every band at once, and the certainty was gone out of him like air out of a wound. "Play it," he said. Sepha played it. The signal filled the pale hall. 3 parts, the same 3 parts, harsh and flat and built from sounds no seraph mouth could shape. It meant nothing to any of them. It was a name in a language born somewhere past the edge of the held sky. In the dark they had told themselves was empty, and not one of the 11 oldest minds in the galaxy could read it. But the youngest reader on the morning watch had been listening to it for an hour, while her elders argued, and Sepha had done what the young do, which is to stop trying to match a new thing against the old records, and simply listen to what the thing is. "I cannot translate it," she said, "but I can tell you what it is doing. The first part is long and low, the second part is sharp, the third part rises at the end." Her voice was quiet now, almost gentle, the voice of someone explaining a hard thing to people who do not want to hear it. "High table. It is not asking us anything. It is not threatening us. It rises at the end, the way a word rises when it is a question with an answer already known." She drew a slow breath. "I think it is asking if anyone out here can hear it. I think it has been crossing the dark for a very long time, alone, calling, and finding nothing. And I think it has finally reached a sky full of voices, and it wants to know if we are friends or not." For a long moment, the pale hall was silent, except for the harsh 3-part name repeating on every band. Then Valancourt made the choice that the powerful so often make when a strange thing arrives and offers them the chance to answer in peace. He made the choice out of fear, and fear had never once in the history of the Seraph Dominion led to a kind decision. "It does not matter what it is asking," the First Lord said. "It is not in our record. It moves where we cannot hold. It is coming for the center, and we cannot stop it. And a thing we cannot stop is a thing we cannot allow to arrive. Wake the fixed fleet, all of it. Wake the wardens of the inner ring." He turned from the wall, from the dark knife, from the rising question repeating on every band. "We will not answer its call. We will answer it with the whole weight of the Dominion, and we will tear it out of the sky before it reaches the center, and then we will go to the edge and find whatever sent it, and hold that still forever too." Osk Thune did not rise to follow the order. She stayed in her seat, the oldest of them, watching the dark ship and listening to the rising question it would not stop asking. "You are answering a knock at the door with a fleet," she said quietly. "It called to us in peace. It asked if we were friends." "And we will tell it what we are," Valancourt said. Osk Thune closed all 4 of her pale eyes. "Yes," she said, "we will." The fixed fleet of the Seraph Dominion had not fired a shot in 400 years, because in 400 years, nothing had been foolish enough to make it. It hung in a great still ring around the inner worlds, 6,000 war barges, and 10,000 smaller hulls, every one of them held in place by the lattice, so perfectly, that a barge could sit unmoving for a century, and not drift the width of a hand. The Seraph did not build engines into their warships the way other peoples did. Why would they? The lattice moved their fleet for them, slid the great barges through the held sky like stones across a frozen pond, slow and certain, and unstoppable. A people who hold the sky do not need to chase. They simply decide where a thing will be, and the sky brings it there. Amun-Resh watched the fixed fleet wake from the high deck of the Stillwatch throne, and even afraid as he was, the sight of it moved him. 6,000 war barges, each one a city of gray bone and frozen sky, turning together, as the lattice took them up and began to slide them into a wall across the path of the dark knife. It was the greatest force the settled galaxy had ever raised in one place. It had been built to be the last word in any argument, the proof that nothing in the held sky could ever truly threaten the center. The dark knife reached the wall in 19 minutes. Sepha called the numbers from the deep room, and the high deck listened, and far below them in the pale hall, the high table listened, and across 4,000 worlds, the wardens of the inner ring listened, because the lattice carried the readers' voices to all of them at once. "It is not slowing for the wall," Sepha said. "It sees the fleet. It must see the fleet. It is going faster. It cannot go through 6,000 barges," a warden said on the open channel. "Lay the field across the whole gap. Freeze it in the throat. Pin it against the wall and let the barges close. They laid the field across the whole gap. They poured the held weight of 1,000 stations into the narrow throat of sky the dark knife had to cross, and they made of it a wall of frozen momentum that should have stopped a comet, a wall that no thing born under the lattice could have pushed through if it burned for a year. The dark knife crossed it without slowing at all, and as it crossed, the line of cold blue light along its spine opened. It was not a weapon the way the Seraph understood weapons. The Dominion did not fight with fire. They fought with stillness, with the slow, merciless grip of a sky that would not let you move. When the blue line opened, Amun-Resh expected a beam, a bolt, some hot, bright violence he could understand, and fear in the ordinary way. Instead, the dark ship simply moved, and where it moved, the lattice died. That was the only way the readers could describe it afterward, in the long, terrible reports they would write and rewrite for years. The dark knife cut a line through the held sky, and along that line the grip of the lattice let go. Not weakened, not strained. Let go, entirely, the way a held breath lets go, and in the gap, the dark ship left behind it, the 6,000 war barges of the fixed fleet, suddenly found themselves floating in a sky that no longer held them. They had no engines. They had never needed engines. The lattice had always moved them. The dark knife passed through the center of the Great Wall, threading the narrow space between two barges, with a precision that no thing moving at 700 should have been able to manage, and behind it, a corridor of dead sky opened 20 barges wide, and in that corridor, 600 war barges of the Seraph Dominion hung suddenly powerless, drifting, unable to turn, unable to close, unable to do anything at all but watch the dark thing tear past them into the open sky beyond. It did not fire on them, Sephamun said into the silence. Her voice was strange. High table. It went through the heart of the fleet, and it did not fire on a single barge. It only let them go. It freed them from the field, and left them whole. No Seraph aboard those freed barges ever forgot the moment the held sky let go of them, and there were 600 barges of witnesses, so the story could not be silenced even by an empire that silenced everything. A barge warden named HFY was at his post on the war barge Steady Reach when the dark knife threaded the gap, and he felt the lattice die around his ship, the way you feel the floor vanish in a dream. One instant the held sky had him, the firm, constant grip that had carried his barge through the dark his whole life, the grip every Seraph felt from birth and never noticed, because it was always there, the way you never notice the air. The next instant, it was simply gone. Steady Reach hung in dead sky, unheld, unmoving, a city of gray bone with no engine and no field, and nothing at all to carry it, and HFY understood for the first time in his life that his people had built their entire civilization on a thing they did not own and could not make, and had only ever borrowed from a galaxy that the dark knife had just shown them how to give back. He should have been afraid. The held sky was gone and his barge was helpless. But HFY was not afraid, and he could never afterward explain why, except that in the instant the grip let go, before he understood anything, before the fear could find him, there had been one breath of something he had no word for. One breath of the dark knife sky, the unheld sky, the sky where a thing could move on its own strength because nothing was holding it down. And in that one breath, HFY, who had served the lattice his whole life, who believed in the held sky the way he believed in the ground, felt his own helpless drifting barge and thought, with a clarity that frightened him more than any weapon, that this was what the 4,000 had felt every day for 9,000 years, and had simply forgotten to call it anything but normal. The dark knife passed close to Steady Reach. Close enough that HFY saw it with his own 4 eyes through the barge's reading glass, not as a mark on a wall, but as a thing, a real thing, lean and dark and impossibly fast, the line of cold blue light along its spine burning steady as it slid past at a speed that should not have been possible, threading the narrow space between his barge and the next, with a hand so sure it never came within 1,000 lengths of either. It did not fire on him. It did not even seem to notice him, the way you do not notice the door you walk through. And then it was past, and gone, and the corridor of dead sky it left behind it, slowly closed, as the readers far away fought to re-anchor the freed barges, and the held grip came back, and Steady Reach was carried once more. But HFY had felt the unheld sky now, for one breath, and he could not unfeel it, and neither could the wardens of the other 599 freed barges, every one of whom had felt the same thing in the same instant. 600 barge crews of Seraph warriors, the proud arm of the Dominion, the fixed fleet itself, had felt the held sky let go, and had felt, underneath the helplessness, that one impossible breath of free. And when they came home, in the long days after, they talked. They were not supposed to. The Dominion did not encourage its warriors to speak of the day the dark knife crossed their sky. But you cannot order 600 crews to forget the morning, the floor of the world vanished, and for one breath, the sky was theirs to move through. And so they talked, in low voices, in the deep rooms of the barges, and the talk spread the way the talk on the held world spread, and the Dominion found, to its dismay, that the dark knife had not only taught the 4,000 caught peoples that the sky could move. It had taught the keepers of the fist the very same lesson, in the very same instant. And a fist whose own fingers have felt what it is to open is a fist that will never again close the way it did. HFY would, in the years after, be among the first wardens to argue in the deep councils of the fixed fleet that the Dominion should stop pretending it still held the sky and start learning, instead, how to live in a galaxy that had remembered how to move. He had felt the truth of it for one breath, and one breath had been enough. He had touched the dark knife sky, the sky with no lattice in it, and he wanted, before he died, to feel it again, on purpose this time, in a Seraph ship, built to move on its own strength, crossing the unheld dark the way the dark knife crossed it, free. In the pale hall, Thuni spoke, and her old voice carried to all 4,000 worlds. "It is showing us," she said. "It crossed our greatest wall as though it were nothing, and it touched 600 of our warships, and it killed not one of them. It wants us to understand. It is not here to burn us. It is faster than us and stronger than us, and it could have ended 600 barges in a breath. And instead, it opened its hand and showed us empty palms." A pause. "It is still broadcasting. The same question. On every band. Are we friends?" "Answer the fleet," Valancourt said, and his voice had gone hard and cold and frightened. "Re-anchor the freed barges. Close the wall again, and give the order I have not given in 200 years. Tell the fixed fleet to fire." Thun turned in her seat. "First Lord, it spared them. Do not answer mercy with." "It is in no record," Valancourt said. "It moves where we cannot hold. It walked through our greatest wall to prove that nothing we have can stop it. And you ask me to call that a friend? A friend is a thing you can hold, Lattice Lord. A thing you can stop. A thing whose hand you can find when you reach for it. This thing we cannot hold and cannot stop and cannot find, and that is not a friend. That is the end of us, if we let it arrive. Tell the fleet to fire." So the fixed fleet fired, for the first time in 400 years, on a ship that had just spared 600 of its barges. The Seraph did have one weapon that was not stillness. At the heart of each war barge sat a skybreaker, a drive that could fling a spear of collapsed momentum across the dark, a frozen javelin moving at the field's own limit. 6,000 barges loosed their skybreakers at once, the greatest single volley ever fired in the history of the settled galaxy, a storm of frozen spears that filled the throat of the sky with death enough to shatter a moon. Every one of them was thrown at the field's limit, 40. The dark knife was moving at 760. The reports would say, later, that the human ship did not so much dodge the volley as outrun the very idea of it. It was simply not where the spears arrived. It had crossed the killing ground and come out the far side before the frozen javelins finished crossing the space where it had been. 6,000 skybreakers tore through empty sky and flew on into the dark, spent, useless. A 400-year-old fleet's whole fury thrown at a shadow that had already gone. And the dark knife, clear of the wall now, clear of the fleet, with the open road to the center wide before it, did a thing that none of them expected. It slowed. For the first time since the alarm rang, the small fast ship eased its terrible speed, gentled down out of 700, down and down, until it hung almost still in the dark beyond the broken wall, well within reach of the center it had been racing toward, close enough now that the inner worlds could see it with their own naked eyes as a single cold gray star. It stopped, it turned, and it faced the fleet it had just outrun, the fleet that had just emptied its whole arsenal into its wake, and it waited. "Why is it stopping?" a warden whispered on the open channel. "It had the road. It could have reached the center. Why is it stopping where we can reach it?" It was Sepha Mun who understood first, because she had been listening to the rising question for hours while her elders made fists. "It stopped because we stopped being a question," she said quietly. "It asked if we were friends. We answered with 600 freed and unharmed, and then we answered with 6,000 spears. It has the answer now." Her voice caught. "High table. It is not running anymore, because it has decided it does not need to run. It came out of the dark, looking for someone to talk to, and it found us, and we fired on it after it spared us. And now it has stopped to look at us properly, to take our measure. The way you stop and look at a thing that has just shown you exactly what it is." The dark knife hung in the held sky, slow now, patient now, the line of cold blue light along its spine burning steady and bright, and then it changed its broadcast. "The signal is different," Sepha Mun said. "The three-part name, it is gone. There is a new signal now, shorter, 2 parts." A long pause, while the youngest reader on the morning watch listened to a voice from past the edge of the sky. "The first part is the same low sound from its name. I think it is still telling us who it is. But the second part," she stopped. "Read it," Valancourt said. "The second part does not rise like a question," Sepha Mun said. "It falls. It is flat, and it falls at the end, and it does not ask anything at all." She drew a breath that the whole galaxy heard. "First Lord, it is not asking if we are friends anymore. It has stopped asking. The new signal is a statement. It is telling us its name, and then it is telling us one thing more. The same flat falling sound over and over, and I do not need the archive to read a sound that simple." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "It is telling us to stand down." Back at the center, before the deep anchor, the high table tried one more thing, and it was the trying of it that finally taught the oldest minds in the galaxy what the dark knife truly was. Between the broken wall and the waking of the deep anchor, in the hours when the dark ship hung slow and patient and waited to be understood, Valancourt ordered the readers to do what no seraph had thought to do in all the long fear of that day. He ordered them to look inside it. The lattice could not hold the dark knife, but the lattice could still see, and a thing held still long enough can be studied even if it cannot be caught. So the readers of the high deck turned every eye they had on the slow gray ship hanging in the open sky, and they looked, and they tried to learn what manner of thing had come out of the dark to break their world. What they found unsettled them more than the speed had. The dark knife was not large. Set against a seraph war barge it was small, a single lean tower of dead gray metal, a thing one barge could have swallowed whole. It carried no great fleet behind it. It carried no swarm, no horde, no overwhelming weight of numbers. It was one ship. The thing that had crossed their sky faster than the whole held galaxy could stop, that had walked through their greatest wall and turned their deepest weapon inside out, was a single vessel smaller than the least of their barges, and that was the first thing that frightened Oscthun, because it meant the power of the dark ship was not in its size at all. "How many aboard it?" Valancourt asked. "Count its crew. A ship that does a thing like this, it must be packed with warriors. Count them." The readers counted, as best they could see through the dead gray hull, and the number they brought back made the pale hall go quiet. "Few," Sepha Mun said. "High table, there are very few aboard. We cannot count them exactly through the hull, but the warm shapes are scattered and small. A handful, less than a Velu fishing crew. This is not a warship full of soldiers. It is a small ship with a small crew, crossing the dark alone." "That is impossible," a warden said. "One small crew cannot do what we have watched it do today. It outran the fixed fleet. It broke the deep anchor. A handful of warm bodies cannot." "They did not do it with their bodies," Oscthun said quietly. "Do you not see it yet? We keep looking for the strength in the wrong place. We look for a great fleet and find one ship. We look for a great crew and find a handful. We look for a great weapon and find a line of cold blue light that does not burn but only opens. The strength of this thing is not in any of the places we know how to look, because we have spent 9,000 years measuring strength in held weight. And this ship was built by a people who never had a lattice to teach them that lie." She turned to the wall, to the slow gray knife. Their strength is not in how much they can hold. It is in how far they can reach. A handful of them crossed the entire great dark, alone, in one small ship, on nothing but their own speed and their own will, calling the whole way, looking for friends. We could not cross our own held sky without the lattice to carry us. They crossed the unheld dark with nothing but themselves. Her old voice dropped low. We thought we were the strong ones, because we held the most. They are the strong ones because they need to hold nothing at all. The readers studied the dark knife in silence after that, and the more they looked, the more the truth of it pressed on them. The ship had no banners, because it answered to no empire that needed banners. It had no registry mark, because it came from a sky where no one catalogued the things that moved. It carried a small crew, because a small crew was enough, when the strength was in the reaching and not the holding. And the line of cold blue light along its spine, the thing the readers had taken for a weapon, was not a weapon in any sense the Seraph understood. It was a drive. It was the thing that let the ship cross the unheld dark, the thing that let it move where nothing could hold it. And the reason it could break the deep anchor was simply that the Seraph had built their whole power on holding the sky still, and the dark knife had been built, from its first rivet, on the opposite truth. The Seraph had asked, for 9,000 years, how to make the galaxy stop moving. The people past the edge had asked how to move through anything at all. And when the two answers met, in the dark above the center, there was never any question which one would win. Because a thing built to stop the sky is helpless against a thing built on the certainty that the sky was never meant to be stopped. Send to it, Valancourt said. And for one moment, before the worst of his fear took him again, the First Lord very nearly made the right choice. Send to it on the open band. Tell it we see it. Tell it we are listening. Ask it what it wants. But Sephamun had already been listening, and she answered before the readers could send. First Lord, it told us what it wants in the first hour. It asked if we were friends. It has not stopped asking. It is still asking now, underneath the order to stand down, very quietly, on the lowest band, the same rising shape it used at the start. She paused. It never stopped asking. Even after we fired 6,000 spears, even after we threw the deep anchor, underneath everything else it has been broadcasting, it has kept asking the same first question this whole time, very softly, in case we changed our answer. Her voice grew thick. It still wants to be friends. It would rather be friends. Everything it has done today, the freeing of the barges, the sparing, the showing of empty hands, all of it has been the same single message told 100 ways. We do not have to be enemies. We could simply not be. For a long moment, Valancourt stood with the chance to answer that question in his hands, and the whole future of the Dominion balanced on what he would say. And then Osthun, watching his face, saw the fear win, and knew before he spoke that he was about to reach for the deep anchor, and tried to stop him, and could not. Valancourt did not stand down, because a being who has held the center of the galaxy for 200 years does not know how, and so he made the second worst choice of his long life, which was to reach for the one weapon he had been saving. Wake the deep anchor, he said. In the pale hall, Osthun turned so fast that her old joints cracked. No, she said. Not that. First Lord, not that. You do not understand what you are reaching for. I understand it perfectly, Valancourt said. It is the heaviest grip we have ever built. It is the grip we made after the bad year, when the marches drifted free, and we swore it would never happen again. It can hold a star still. It can stop a wandering world cold in its track. This thing outran the fixed fleet, and broke our greatest wall and shrugged off 1,000 stations. But it has not yet felt the deep anchor, and nothing, Lattice Lord, nothing has ever broken the deep anchor. Because we have never used it, Osthun said, and her old voice had gone very quiet and very urgent. We have never used it because it does not let go. The deep anchor is not a grip you close and open. It is a grip you close. Once, forever. It freezes a thing out of the moving sky and into the fixed sky, and a thing that goes into the fixed sky does not come back out. Not ever. Not for anyone. Not for us. We built it to be a tomb. If you close it on that ship, you will not stop it, First Lord. You will entomb it, and you do not know what that ship will do when you try to make it a stone. It will become a stone. Valancourt said. Like everything else, and he gave the order. The deep anchor woke at the heart of the inner ring, a thing the Seraph had built into the bones of a hollowed world, and never once turned on. It did not draw its weight from 1,000 stations. It drew its weight from the held momentum of the entire settled galaxy, 4,000 worlds, and every fixed star and every frozen stone, 9,000 years of stillness, gathered into a single closing fist. When it woke, the whole sky dimmed, because the lattice everywhere drew thin, as the deep anchor pulled the held weight of everything toward one small point in the dark. And it closed on the dark knife. The reports would spend 100 pages on the next 11 seconds, and they would never fully agree on what happened, because no Seraph mind had ever been built to understand a thing that did not behave the way held things behaved. The deep anchor closed, and for the first time, the dark ship felt it. Sepha saw it on her bowl, saw the small fast thing shudder, saw the line of cold blue light along its spine gutter and dim. For one heartbeat the whole galaxy held its breath, and the high table leaned forward, and Valancourt's 4 eyes burned with the certainty of 200 unbroken years, because the deep anchor had it. The deep anchor had finally caught the thing that nothing could catch, and now the dark knife would go into the fixed sky and become a stone, and the Dominion would go on holding everything as it always had. The dark ship did not go into the fixed sky. It did the one thing the Seraph had told themselves for 9,000 years that no thing could do. The line of cold blue light, guttering, dimming, gathered itself, and then it did not push against the deep anchor at all. It reached into the deep anchor, into the closing fist, into the gathered held weight of the entire settled galaxy, and it took hold of the thing the Seraph had built. It is in the anchor, Sepha said, and her voice broke. High table. It is inside the deep anchor. It is not fighting the grip. It is holding the grip. It has its hand on the anchor itself. The dark ship turned the deep anchor inside out. The grip that the Seraph had built to freeze a thing out of the moving sky and into the fixed sky, the one-way tomb, the grip that did not let go, reversed in the human ship's hand and let go of everything at once. 9,000 years of gathered stillness released in a single instant. Across 4,000 worlds the lattice did not weaken. It opened. Every held star, every frozen stone, every war barge pinned in its place, every drifting bone the Dominion had ever caught and kept still in the dark, all of it, everywhere, came suddenly and completely free. The sky moved. For the first time in 9,000 years, the entire settled galaxy moved, all at once, every held thing remembering how. And the Stillwatch throne shuddered to its bones, as the held weight it had carried since before memory simply lifted away. And then, gently, the dark knife closed the deep anchor again, the way you close a door you have shown someone how to open, and the lattice settled back, and the held sky was held once more. Nothing was destroyed, nothing was broken. The dark ship had reached into the heaviest weapon the Seraph Dominion had ever built, taken it apart, shown the whole galaxy in a single instant exactly what it would feel like to be free, and then put the weapon back together and handed it back, untouched, intact, and entirely understood. The readers would argue for years about what truly happened in those 11 seconds, and the argument would never be settled, because the Seraph had no language for it. They had 9,000 words for ways of holding a thing still, and not one word for what the dark knife did. It did not break the deep anchor the way a hammer breaks a stone. It did not overpower it the way a stronger grip overpowers a weaker one. It simply understood it. That was the part the oldest readers could never explain to the young ones who came after. The dark ship reached into the heaviest weapon the Dominion had ever built, the gathered stillness of 9,000 years, and it understood the thing instantly and completely, the way you understand a knot the moment you see how it was tied. And a thing fully understood is a thing that can be undone, because every grip, even the deepest, is only a knot, and every knot that one hand can tie another hand can loose. That was the lesson buried under all the others, the one the Seraph would take longest to learn. They had believed, for 9,000 years, that their power was a thing no one else could understand, that the lattice was too deep, too old, too vast, to be grasped by any mind but theirs. And in a single afternoon, a ship from past the edge had grasped it whole, on the first try, in the middle of being attacked by it, and had handed it back intact to prove the grasping was effortless. The deep anchor had not failed because it was weak. It had failed because it was knowable, and the Dark Knife's people came from a sky that had taught them, above all else, that anything which can be known can be moved. In the pale hall, no one spoke. Valancourt sat at the head of the high table, with his 4 eyes wide and empty, and the certainty of 200 years lay in pieces on the floor of frozen sky, and he could not find a single word. It was Osk Thune who finally rose. The oldest of them stood, slow and white and steady, and she walked to the wall of the pale hall, to the place where the dark knife hung patient in the open sky, and she pressed one long white hand flat against the frozen image of it, the way an old watchkeeper learns to reach. "It is broadcasting again," Sephamon said softly, "a third signal, the longest one yet." "I will read it," Osk Thune said. "Bring it to me. I have lived 9,000 years, and I have spent the last of them being wrong about the edge of the sky. Let me at least hear what the thing I was wrong about has to say." They brought the signal to Osk Thune, and the oldest mind in the galaxy bent her 4 pale eyes to it, and for a long while she was silent. The new signal was not 2 parts. It was not 3. It was long and complex and patient, built carefully, the way you build a message when you have finally given up on being answered quickly and decided to be understood instead. "It is teaching us," Osk Thune said at last. "It is not speaking to us in its own tongue anymore. It listened to us, all those hours, while we threw walls and spears and the deep anchor at it. It listened to our open channels, our readers calling numbers, our wardens giving orders, and it has built us a key. It is speaking to us now in the only thing we both share." She lifted her head, and there was something on her old face that the Seraph had no word for, because it was the look of a being learning humility for the first time in 9,000 years. "It is speaking to us in the language of the held sky, in the lattice itself. It is using the field we built to cage the galaxy as a voice, and it is telling us, plainly, slowly, so even we cannot mistake it, exactly who it is, and exactly why it came." "Read it," Valancourt whispered. There was nothing left of the First Lord's 200 years in his voice. There was only an old frightened creature, asking to be told the truth. Osk Thune read it. "It says it comes from past the edge, from the dark we never crossed, from a sky with no lattice in it at all, a sky where everything moves and nothing is held, and a people learned to cross the great dark on their own strength, because no one ever held it still for them." She paused. "It says it has been crossing the dark for a very long time, ship after ship after ship, reaching out, calling, looking for other voices. It says most of the dark is empty. It says when it found our sky, full of 4,000 voices, it was glad, the way you are glad to find you are not alone." Her hand pressed flatter against the wall. "And then it says it listened to our 4,000 voices for a while, before it ever called to us. And it learned, before it ever spoke, that every one of those voices was held, that 4,000 worlds spoke through a field that pinned them still, that the bright crowded heart of the galaxy was not crowded with free peoples but with caught ones, 4,000 of them, held in place by a sky they did not build and could not break." The pale hall was utterly silent. "It says it called to us anyway," Osk Thune went on, very quietly. "It asked if we were friends, because it hoped the ones who held the sky might be holding it gently, might be keeping the peace, and not the prisoners. It gave us every chance. It spared our fleet. It opened its hand. It asked, plainly, 'Are you friends?'" Her old voice did not shake, but it slowed, the way a voice slows when it carries something heavy. "And we answered it, with 6,000 spears and a tomb. So it has its answer now. It knows what we are. And the last thing it says, 'First Lord,' the very last part of the message, is not for us at all." "Who is it for?" Valancourt asked. Osk Thune took her hand from the wall and turned to face the high table, the 11 oldest minds in the galaxy, the lords of the held sky. "It is for the 4,000, she said. "It is broadcasting past us, on every band, in every held tongue it learned from listening, to every world we ever caught and kept still. It is not telling them to rise. It is not telling them to fight. It is simply telling them the one thing the lattice was built to make them forget." She looked at Valancourt, and there was no triumph in it, only a terrible old clarity. It is telling them that the sky can move, that it has always been able to move, that a single ship from past the edge reached into the heaviest grip we ever built and opened it like a hand. And for one instant, today, every held world in the galaxy felt itself come free. She let the words settle. You cannot unteach that, First Lord. You cannot put it back in the deep anchor. 4,000 worlds just felt the sky move for the first time in 9,000 years, and now they know it is possible. And there is no field heavy enough to hold a people who have remembered that they can move. While the high table argued over walls and spears, a smaller drama was unfolding on a world the Seraph had long since stopped thinking about, and it was on that world that the meaning of the dark knife first became something other than fear. The world was called Harnu Vale, a wet green place near the Veth Reach, one of the 4,000 the Dominion had weighed and caught and held 9,000 years before. Its people were called the Velu, small and patient and slow to anger, and they had lived under the lattice so long that they no longer remembered there had ever been a time before it. They did not chafe at the held sky. You do not chafe at a thing you cannot imagine being otherwise. The Velu fished their warm seas and tended their floating gardens, and sent their grain to the center, and when the Dominion told them their boats would go this far and no farther, they nodded, because that was simply how far boats went. A Velu sky reader named Toma Cell was on her watch the night the dark knife crossed the Veth Reach, and she felt the whole sky shudder. She did not understand it at first. The Velu had no deep anchor, no fixed fleet, only a single old reading station the Dominion had given them long ago to call in their grain reports. But that old station could feel the lattice the way every held thing could feel it, and on the night the dark knife came, Toma Cell felt the grip on her whole world flicker. For just an instant, the way a held breath flickers when the one holding it is suddenly surprised. She had never felt the grip move before. No Velu had. The grip did not move. That was the entire point of the grip. Toma Cell sat very still at her old station and felt the held sky shudder a second time, harder, as something far away crossed a wall that should have stopped a comet, and she did a thing that no Velu had done in 9,000 years. She tuned her old station past the grain bands, past the routine channels, out to the wide-open frequencies the Dominion used for its own business. The bands the held worlds were not forbidden to hear, but never thought to listen to, because what would be the point of listening to a sky you could not change? And she heard the dark knife calling. She heard the harsh three-part name, repeating on every band. She did not understand it, but she heard, underneath it, the thing Sepha Moon had heard from the high deck of the throne, the rising shape at the end, the question with an answer already known. Are there friends out here? Toma Cell was a small, patient creature from a wet green world, who had never in her life been asked whether she was a friend by anyone who could not also hold her still, and the rising shape of that question reached into her and turned something over that had been sleeping for 9,000 years. She listened all night. She listened while the dark knife crossed the broken wall and freed 600 barges and spared every one. She listened while the fixed fleet threw its whole fury into empty sky. And she listened, near dawn, when the dark ship stopped running and turned to take the measure of the thing that had fired on it after it spared them. Toma Cell did not have the Still Watch archive. She did not have the readers of the high deck or the wisdom of Osk Thun. She had only her own ears and her own small life under the held sky, and so she understood the dark knife faster than any lattice lord, because she was not trying to fit it into 9,000 years of certainty. She was only trying to understand a thing that had asked if she might be a friend. By the time the deep anchor woke, Toma Cell had gathered the whole reading house of Harnu Vale around her old station, every sky reader on the world, and they listened together as the heaviest grip the Dominion had ever built closed on the dark ship far away at the center. And they felt, all of them, all at once, the thing that no Velu had ever felt. They felt the sky come free. For one instant, when the dark knife reached into the deep anchor and turned it inside out, the grip on Harnu Vale let go entirely. The held sky over the wet green world simply opened, and for one breath the Velu felt their own world hang free in the dark, unheld, unpinned, able to move, and the floating gardens drifted half a hand's width before the grip settled back, and every reader in the reading house cried out at once, not in fear, but in something none of them had a word for, because no Velu had ever needed a word for the feeling of being suddenly and completely free. Tomacel wept at her old station. She did not know why. She only knew that for one instant, a door she had never known was a door had stood open, and through it she had felt the shape of a sky that moved. And now that she had felt it, she could not unfeel it, and neither could any reader in the house, and neither, she understood, could any of the 4,000 worlds that had just felt the same thing at the same instant. When the dark ship's third signal came, the long one, the one Osk Thune read in the Pale Hall, it came to Harnu Vale too, on every band, in the language of the held sky itself, and Tomacel, who had been listening all night, who had no certainty to defend, and no fist to protect, understood the last part of it, before the high table did. She understood that the part the dark ship broadcast past the throne, to the 4,000, was not a command and not a promise, but only a single quiet fact, offered and then left alone. The sky can move, it always could, you only forgot. Tomacel sat with that fact in the gray light of dawn over her wet green world, and she did not rise up, and she did not call her people to arms, and she did not do any of the things the Dominion feared in those first terrible hours. She did something far more dangerous to a fist that has held a galaxy still for 9,000 years. She remembered, and she made very sure her people remembered with her. In the days after the dark knife left, the change the high table had feared did not come as a storm but as a slow thaw, and the slowness of it was the most frightening thing of all, because you cannot fight a thing that does not attack. It began on Harnu Vale, with Tomacel and her reading house, but it did not stay there. The Velu Skyreader did the one thing the lattice had never been built to prevent. She talked. She put what she had felt onto the open grain bands, plainly, the way the dark knife had taught her by example, and she told the truth, and then left it alone for others to do with as they would. She said the sky had moved. She said she had felt her world hang free. She said a single ship from past the edge had reached into the heaviest grip the Dominion ever built, and opened it like a hand, and that for one instant, every held world had felt the same. And then she stopped talking, and let the 4,000 decide for themselves what to do with a fact like that. The fact spread the way water spreads, which is to say, it found every low place and filled it. A reader on a far world heard Tomacel and asked the throne, on an open band where everyone could hear, whether it was true. The throne did not answer, and the silence was its own kind of answer. A grain barge captain from the Veth Reach, who had felt the freeing himself when the deep anchor turned inside out, told the story to another captain, who told it to another, and within a 10-day, the freeing was known on 100 worlds, and within a season, it was known on all 4,000, not as rumor, but as a thing that had happened, a thing many of them had felt in their own bones on the day the dark knife came. The Dominion tried, at first, to hold the fact still the way it held everything else. It tightened the bands, it silenced Tomacel's old station, and the stations of a dozen worlds that had begun to speak too freely. But you cannot anchor an idea, and every world the throne silenced became a world the others watched, and a silenced world says more than a speaking one. The 4,000 had spent 9,000 years not asking a single question, and now they had one question, the only question, and the harder the Dominion pressed to keep it unasked, the louder the not asking grew. Osk Thune watched it happen from the Pale Hall, and she understood it better than any of them, because she was the one who had built the lattice deepening after the bad year, and she of all the lattice lords knew what the held sky was truly made of. It was never made of weight, she told the high table, in the long hard meetings of those days. We always said it was. We said the lattice held the galaxy still, by sheer held weight, and that was true. But it was not the whole truth. The held weight was only the body of it. The soul of it was the forgetting. The lattice worked, all these 9,000 years, not because 4,000 worlds could not move, but because 4,000 worlds had forgotten that moving was a thing that could be done. We did not pin them, we convinced them. We built a sky so still for so long that they stopped believing in any other kind, and a people who cannot imagine moving do not need to be held at all. They hold themselves. She looked around the ring of frightened lords, and the dark ship knew this. That is why it did not free them. It could have. It reached into the deep anchor and turned it inside out. It could have torn the whole lattice down in an afternoon, and left 4,000 worlds free in the rubble. It chose not to. and we called it mercy. But it was not only mercy, it was understanding. A people freed by someone else's hand are not free. They have only traded one holder for another. The dark ship did not break the body of the lattice. It broke the soul. It did the one thing we could never undo. It made the 4,000 remember. Valancourt, who had not been the same since the deep anchor turned in his hands, listened to this, and was a long time answering. "Then there is nothing to be done," he said at last. "If you are right, there is no grip heavy enough. We cannot anchor a memory." "No," Oscthune agreed. "We cannot. The fist is open, and it will not close again, because the thing it held was never in the fist at all. It was in their minds, and we were only ever borrowing it, and now it has been called home." She was quiet a moment. "But there is something to be done, First Lord. Not to hold them. That is finished. But to choose what we become, now that we cannot hold them. The dark ship asked us, in its first hour, whether we were friends. We answered with spears, because we were afraid. But the 4,000 are not the dark ship. They are the peoples we held, and they are still here, and they have not yet decided what we are to them. We have one chance left, and it is not a chance to put the world back. It is a chance to be the kind of thing that, when the held worlds finally remember the whole way, they choose to keep speaking to, instead of leaving behind." She leaned forward. "The dark ship gave us the same offer it gave them. We do not have to be enemies. We could simply not be. We threw that offer away once, in our fear. We could pick it up again now, in our humbling. The 4,000 are asking the same question of us that the dark ship asked. Are you friends, or are you only a fist that has lost its grip? We get to answer. And this time, Velen, let us not answer with spears." It was that argument, repeated through many hard meetings, that slowly turned the high table. Not all at once, not without bitterness, and not without lords who wanted to spend the last strength of the Dominion trying to close the fist again. But the dark ship had shown them, in a single afternoon, exactly how that would end. And there were enough among the 11 who had felt the deep anchor turn in their hands and did not wish to feel it again. So the change came, slow as a thaw, world by world, question by question. And the dominion that emerged from it, in the long years after, was not the dominion that had ruled the held sky for 9,000 years. It was smaller, and it was humbler, and it held nothing at all anymore but the trust of worlds that had chosen to keep speaking to it. And though no Seraph would say so for a long time, it was, at last, something better than a fist. The 4,000 worlds heard the message, and the Seraph Dominion learned in a single day that the hardest thing in the galaxy to hold still is not a ship, but an idea. It did not happen the way the High Table feared in the first terrible hours. There was no uprising, no fleet of caught peoples turned on the center. The lattice still held. The fixed stars still hung where they had always hung. By every measure the Seraph knew how to take, nothing had changed at all, and that was the worst part, because the thing that had changed was not a thing they had ever learned to measure. Sephimun felt it first in the quietest way. In the days after the dark knife came, she sat her morning watch on the high deck of the Still Watch throne, as she always had, reading the held sky, calling the numbers. And the numbers were the same, but the held worlds, when they spoke across the open channels, spoke differently now. A grain barge from the Veth Reach asked the throne, very politely, why its route had been fixed the way it was fixed, and whether it might be moved. A reader on a far world, calling in a routine report, paused at the end and asked, very quietly, on an open band where 4,000 worlds could hear, whether it was true what the dark ship had said, whether the sky could move. The throne did not answer. The throne did not know how to answer a question it had spent 9,000 years making sure no one would ever think to ask. Valancourt sat in the pale hall for 3 days and did not speak. The first lord of the Seraph Dominion, who had held the center of the galaxy for 200 years, on the certainty that nothing moved unless he allowed it, watched the dark knife on the wall and tried to find, somewhere in his long proud life, the shape of a choice that would put the world back the way it had been. He could not find it. There was no grip heavy enough. There was no anchor deep enough. The thing the dark ship had broken was not in the held sky at all. It was in the minds of 4,000 caught peoples, and the lattice had never been built to reach there, because the lattice had been built on the certainty that no one would ever need to. On the fourth day, the dark knife moved again. Sepha Mun called it from the deep room, but her voice was not afraid this time. It had not been afraid for days. "It is leaving," she said. "It is turning back toward the edge, toward the dark it came from." "Stop it," a warden said on the open channel, but there was no force behind the words, only habit. "It cannot simply arrive and break everything and leave." "We cannot stop it," Oskthun said, from her seat in the pale hall. "We never could." It let us believe for a few hours that the question was whether we could hold it. That was never the question. The question was always what kind of thing we would be when we found that we could not. She rose, slow and white and steady. "It is leaving, because it has done the only thing it came to do. It did not come to conquer us. It did not come to free the 4,000. It is not theirs to free, and it knew that. It came to find out if there were friends out here, and when it learned what we were, it did the one thing a free people can do for a caught one." She looked at the wall, at the dark ship turning back toward the edge of the sky. It showed them the door. It did not open it. It only showed them that there was one. The opening is theirs to do, in their own time, in their own way, and that is the only kind of freedom that holds. The dark knife gathered its terrible speed again, the line of cold blue light along its spine burning bright, and it began to move back toward the dark it had come from, faster and faster, until the held sky could barely keep its eyes on it. And as it went, it broadcast one final signal. This one was short. Sepha Mun caught it, and brought it to the high deck and to the pale hall both at once, so that the oldest and the youngest of the Seraph would hear it together. "It is 2 parts again," she said, "like the second signal, when it stopped to take our measure. The first part is the same low sound it has used every time. Its name, the thing it has been telling us since the first hour." She paused. "But the second part is new. I have not heard it before. It is not flat, and it does not fall like an order, and it does not rise like a question." She listened, one last time, to the voice from past the edge of the sky. It rises, and then it steadies, and then it holds, open at the end, not asking, not telling, just left open. She looked up. "Oskthun, I do not have the archive for it, but I have listened to this ship for 4 days, and I know what an open ending sounds like. I think it is not goodbye. I think it is the kind of thing you say when you are leaving a place you might come back to. I think it is saying, when you are ready. When you have remembered how to move, we will be out here. Call, and we will hear you." The dark knife reached the edge of the held sky. The edge the Seraph had told themselves for 9,000 years was the edge of everything, the boundary past which nothing lived and nothing came. It crossed it without slowing. It went into the dark the Dominion had never crossed, the dark it had called empty, and the dark took it in, and it was gone, and the last cold blue light of it faded into the great unheld black, still calling, still moving, still free. For a long while, the pale hall was silent. Then Oskthun spoke, to no one, to all of them, to the 4,000 worlds listening on the open band. "We will spend the rest of our years trying to find its name in the archive," she said. "We will scour every record we keep, every dead registry, every burned page, and we will never find it, because we are not the ones who keep its record. We told ourselves for 9,000 years that everything that could be known was already known, that everything that could move was already held, that the edge of our sky was the edge of all things. And one ship, one single ship from past the dark, moving faster than our whole held sky could stop, in no record we keep, answering to no name we know, proved every one of those things false in a single afternoon, and then it opened its hand and let us live." She closed all 4 of her pale eyes. "I do not think it was the only one. I do not think a people who build a ship like that, who cross the great dark alone for a very long time only to find us, send just one. I think out past the edge, there is a sky with no lattice in it, full of things that move on their own strength, and I think we have just been seen by it. And I think the 4,000 have just learned that we can be seen." She opened her eyes and looked at Valancourt, who had not spoken in days. "You asked, First Lord, what people builds a ship that does not feel the lattice," she said. "I can answer you now. A people who were never held. A people who learned to cross the dark because no one ever made it still for them, and so they had to find their own way through. on nothing but their own speed, and their own will, and their own refusal to be stopped. We built a sky that holds everything, and we thought that made us strong. They built ships that need no holding, and they came to our held sky and showed us, gently, what strong actually means. She turned back to the wall, to the empty place at the edge where the dark knife had gone. We are not the center of the galaxy anymore, Velen. We never were. We were only the part of it that had not yet been visited. Velenkor rose from the head of the high table at last. He was old and he was diminished, and the certainty of 200 years would never come back to him. But something else had come into him in its place, something the Sereth had no word for, something closer to the truth than anything he had ever held. "Open the bands," he said quietly, "all of them, to the 4,000. The high table stirred. "First Lord, they have questions," Velenkor said. "They have wanted to ask them for 9,000 years and never dared. The dark ship gave them the courage. The least we can do, before they remember entirely how to move, is be the kind of thing that answers when they finally call." He looked at Oskthun, and something passed between the oldest and the once proudest of them, some hard understanding earned far too late, but earned all the same. We held them because we were afraid of what they would do if they were free. That was always what the lattice was. 9,000 years of fear made into a fist, and today, a free people reached into that fist and opened it, and showed us it was never strong at all, only frightened. He drew himself up. "I would rather be the thing that learns than the thing that is broken. Open the bands, let us find out, at last, what the 4,000 have to say." So the Sereth Dominion opened its bands, and the 4,000 worlds began, slowly, carefully, to speak. They spoke first in small things, the way water finds the smallest cracks before it moves a wall. A world of weavers near the inner ring asked, on the open band, whether the routes their barges had flown for 9,000 years might be drawn a different way, because there was a market 2 systems over that the old fixed routes had never reached. The throne, which had once answered every such question with silence and the soft pressure of the held sky, answered this time with a route, a single new route, drawn by request, the first new route the Dominion had laid in 9,000 years. It was a small thing. It changed almost nothing. And 4,000 worlds watched it happen, and understood that the sky had been redrawn by a question, and the not asking that had held the galaxy still for so long grew quieter still. On Harnu Vale, Toma Sel taught the young readers of her house to listen to the unheld dark. Not for the dark knife. It was long gone, and she did not expect it back soon, and she had made her peace with that. She taught them to listen for the next one, because she had understood, listening all that long night, that a people who build a ship like that and cross the great dark looking for friends do not send only one, and somewhere out past the edge there were more of them, moving on their own strength through a sky no one held, and one day another cold blue light would come out of the empty dark calling the same patient question. And when it came, Toma Sel meant for the Velu to be ready to answer it the way it deserved to be answered, the way the Sereth had not. With an open hand, and a name freely given, and the word friend. A world of miners deep in the hollow marches, the same marches that had drifted free for one bad season 9,000 years before, did the boldest thing of all. They asked the throne, plainly, on the widest band, whether they might build engines, real engines, the kind the dark knife had, the kind that moved a thing on its own strength, and needed no lattice to carry it. For 9,000 years, the building of engines had been the one thing the Dominion forbade above all others, because a world with engines is a world that can move whether the sky allows it or not, and the whole held sky was built on the certainty that no world would ever move, unless allowed. The high table met for 9 days over that question. There were lords who wanted to silence the marches the way they had silenced Toma Sel's station, and there were lords who remembered the deep anchor turning inside out and wanted no more of fists. In the end, it was Oskthun who answered the miners, and she answered them with a single word, and the word was yes. "We cannot hold them anymore," she told the high table when they protested. "We have established that. The only question left is whether we make ourselves their friend or their jailer, in the years they spend remembering how to move, and a jailer with no working lock is only a fool standing in a doorway. Let them build their engines." Let them learn what it is to move on their own strength, the way the dark ship's people learned, the way we never did, because we built a sky to carry us instead. And when they have built them, when the first Velu boat and the first Marches hauler cross the dark on their own power and not on ours, let us be the ones who taught them how, and not the ones who tried to stop them and failed. She was quiet a moment. We held the galaxy still for 9,000 years and called it order. The dark ship showed us, in a single afternoon, that it was only fear. I would like, before I die, to be part of something that is not fear. Let them build their engines. So they built their engines, slowly, world by world. It was not fast. 9,000 years of forgetting how to move is not unlearned in a season. There were worlds that wanted to race ahead, and worlds that were afraid to move at all. Worlds that blamed the Dominion for 9,000 years of stillness, and worlds that had grown so used to being held that the very idea of an unheld sky frightened them more than any empire. The opening of the fist was not clean, and it was not simple, and it was not without its own hard years, but it was real, and it could not be undone, because the thing the dark knife had broken was the one thing no grip could ever close again. And on every world that built its first engine, in those long, slow years, the people who flew the first unheld flight all did the same thing at the moment their craft moved on its own strength for the first time, though no two of them had ever spoken to one another, and none of them had been taught it. At the moment of the first free movement, they broadcast a signal, 2 parts, a name, and then a sound that rose and steadied and held and stayed open at the end. They had all heard the dark knife's last message, carried on every band, in the language of the held sky. And without ever being told to, 4,000 worlds had decided that this was how you marked the moment a thing learned to move, with your name, freely given, and an open ending sent out into the dark. Toward the next one out there, who might be listening, toward whoever came next, toward the cold blue lights that crossed the empty dark, looking for friends, so that the next time one of them came out of the unheld black and asked the patient question, it would find, at last, a sky that knew how to answer. It would take a long time. 9,000 years is a long fist to open, and not every world spoke at once, and not every lattice lord agreed, and there were hard years ahead, and arguments, and worlds that wanted to move before the others were ready. But it had begun. The thing the dark ship had wanted had begun, the only thing it had come to start, and the only thing it had refused to finish for them. Because freedom finished by someone else is just a new kind of holding. And far out past the edge of the held sky, in the great unheld dark the Seraph had called empty, a single dark knife with a line of cold blue light along its spine moved on through the black, alone, still calling, still listening, crossing the long dark toward the next sky full of voices, ready to ask the same question it had asked of them. It would never appear in the Stillwatch archive. It would never answer to a name the Seraph could read. It would remain, forever, the one thing the Dominion could not hold, and could not catch, and could not catalog. The ship that came out of the dark they swore was empty, moving faster than the whole held sky could stop, and changed everything, by doing nothing but showing 4,000 caught peoples that the door was there. On the high deck of the Stillwatch throne, Sepha Moon finished her morning watch. The held sky hung before her, 200,000 stars, and every fixed thing between them, the same sky she had read every day of her life, but she did not read it the same way anymore. She looked at the held stars, and for the first time she did not see a thing that could not move. She saw a thing that had simply not yet decided to. She thought of the dark knife, gone now into the black, still calling across the empty dark for friends. And quietly, on a private band, so quietly that the archive would never catch it, the youngest reader on the morning watch sent a single signal of her own toward the edge of the sky. It was 2 parts. The first part was clumsy, because she was only learning, but she had listened to the dark ship for 4 days, and she had learned its shape, and she built her message the way it had built its last one. The first part was a name, her own. The second part rose, and steadied, and held, and stayed open at the end. Not goodbye, not a question. When we are ready, it said, we will remember how to move. Wait for us out there. And far out in the dark, though no record would ever show it, and no archive would ever know, something heard her, and held the open ending of her message gently in its hand, and moved on through the black, content, toward the next sky.